through his workplace at MGM corporate offices, and they made it. And I said last week, if you remember, that I had told the older brother, please watch out for your younger brother, and I told the younger brother, really watch out for your older brother. And they did. They had a good cruise down there. They were telling me about the events of their Cuba vacation. When they got back, we had pizza and went out for lunch, and we chatted about it. They said at one point they went on a tour of the city, and they were talking to the tour guide, and they were talking about how they had to be back on the ship every night, and they stayed on the ship and many of the meals on the ship, and they were talking about when they would leave Cuba, and they asked the tour guide, well, what happens if you miss the boat? You probably have to go connect with the U.S. Embassy there, right? And the tour guide said, well, that would be a problem because there no longer is a U.S. Embassy in Cuba. They made it back. And sometimes it's good that a dad doesn't know everything. I didn't know that there was no embassy there anymore. I had forgotten they had a bunch of issues there. They closed that down. There's no personnel. And I explained to them, and they did a good job on how to use their passport there. They carried their passport with them on their bodies, and anyone, if you travel internationally, you have a passport, you carry it maybe like this underneath your shirt. And you have your passport. You need your passport. Before I talked to them, they said, oh yeah, when we go into Cuba, we'll just leave our passport on board ship. Bad idea. Bad idea. You need your passport. It's always very, very important. This is my passport. The last time I used it was a few years ago. We went into Canada. You even need your passport now when you go into Canada. And I remember going to Canada, crossing the border with our passport. They had 3 or 4 lanes open for your vehicle to go across the border. We got into the wrong lane because it must have been the border agent's first week on the job. Because as we got in the lane and we sat there, the cars on either side were zooming through. And we weren't moving at all. Finally, we got up there, and he asked to see our passports. And we showed him the passport, and he looked at the pictures. He looked at us. He said, and why are you going to Canada? I said, well, we're going to Whistler. We went up to Whistler, the ski resort there, and I had mountain bikes on the back of my car, the back of the Ford truck. And I said, we're mountain biking. He looked, okay, looked at the passport again. This just took forever. He looked at me and he said, well, do you know the license plate number of your vehicle? Okay, and they looked at the passport again. We finally went through as the cars were zooming by on either side of us getting into Canada. You need your passport if you're traveling. Your passport is important. What's important about it? Well, it gives your identity. It makes you legitimate. It makes you a citizen of this country, and that can be recognized wherever you go. Very important to have a passport. Very important to know and to prove where your identity is located. Paul, in Philippians, is writing from a jail cell. And it's a tough situation for Paul. And he doesn't know what's going to happen because he talks about, well, I may not make it. I might not make it out of this jail cell. But he knows, and he lifts up throughout this letter to the Philippians, he knows what's important about his passport to heaven, his passport to be a part of what Jesus Christ has for him in the future, and he knows that at some point he is going to die. And he's going to need his passport. And he's going to pass into the heavenly places. But what does he say? This is very important. He says to live is Christ, to die is gain. In other words, it really doesn't matter what happens. It's a win-win situation. I know my identity. I know I've got a passport with Christ Jesus. I'm getting to heaven someday. It might be sooner, it might be later. To live is Christ. In other words, to live, to continue to go on with my mission and ministry, I can do significant things for Jesus, even in this prison cell. To live is Christ, but to die is gain. What a beautiful way for Paul to sum up his life. A 4-letter memoir, if you will. To live is Christ, and then 4 more letters. To die is gain. He had been a persecutor of Christians. Then on the road to Damascus, Jesus had appeared to him, and he realized what his passport was all about in this life, to get into the heavenly places, and it was through Jesus. And Paul has a profound development on the early church as it grows. You and I might use different language to describe our life purpose. I love what Paul has done here. To live as Christ, to die as gain. We might say it something like this: well, our purpose is to leave this world a better place. Or our purpose in life is to glorify God in what I do. Or my purpose in life is to live a life of love following the example of Jesus. Paul says it very clearly. Very simply, four-word phrase followed by a second four-word phrase. To live as Christ, to die is gain. What would some people substitute in place of this? The first part, to live as Christ. Would some people say to live as work? I think so. Might some people say to live as football? To live as soccer? To live, if you're a millennial, to live as my iPod. We all have different things we can put in there. For Paul, he says to live as Christ, to die is gain. And yes, there are many good things in life to live for. And there are great families and hobbies. But when we come to the end of our day, we will realize that if we substitute other things for this, then those things are not sufficient. To live as Christ, to die is gain. There was a movie out a while back. Maybe you remember the movie. Maybe you saw the movie City Slickers. Billy Crystal, City Slickers, great movie. Yeah. Billy Crystal's a salesman having a midlife crisis. At the beginning of the movie, he goes to his son's school where they're having career day, and he's sharing about life. And let me read to you what Billy Crystal says. He can say it a lot better than I can, but if you've seen the movie, imagine Billy Crystal saying it. He says to the kids, and they're just bewildered. They have no idea what he's talking about. He says to the kids, hey kids, value this time in your life, because this is the time in your life when you still have your choices. It goes by fast. When you're a teenager, you think you can do anything, and you do. Your 20s are a blur. 30s, you raise your family, you make a little money, and you think to yourself, what happened to my 20s? 40s, you grow a little pot belly, you grow another chin. The music starts to get too loud, one of your old girlfriends from high school becomes a grandmother. 50s, you have a minor surgery, you call it a procedure, but it's a surgery. 60s, you'll have a major surgery, the music is still too loud, but it doesn't matter because you can't hear it anymore. 70s, you and the wife retire to Fort Lauderdale, you start eating dinner at 2 p.m. in the afternoon. You have lunch around 10 a.m., breakfast the night before. You spend most of your time wandering around malls looking for the ultimate soft yogurt and muttering, how come the kids don't call? How come the kids don't call? And then in the movie, he turns to the kids and he says, any questions? Great scene in that movie, City Slickers. The real question is that really all there is in life? And the answer is that without Christ, that's all there really is. What Billy Crystal says in the movie, and it's just hilarious, that really is all there is, unless you have Jesus Christ. To live as Christ, to die is gain. In the book, The Pursuit of Happiness, the author David Myers surveys all the research that's been done on happiness, and he looks at money, power, fame, all the other things the world calls us to follow. In the end, he concludes that the happiest people are those people who are active in their church. Isn't that something? The happiest people are those who are active in their church, and in their church, they participate in some form of ministry to help other people. And that really shouldn't surprise us at all. To live as Christ, to die is gain. Paul's life purpose that he succinctly puts into 2 4-word phrases His life purpose is really the way to happiness and joy. To live is Christ, to die is gain. In other words, everything we do is a win-win situation. As long as we are here on this life, we have things to do. And we have a purpose. And if we die, and we're all going to pass into the heavenly places someday, if we pass into the heavenly places, we know we've got our passport ready. And we are ready to go beyond the borders of earth, past the borders of heaven, and we will be welcomed by Christ and all the angelic hosts. Paul's identification with Christ resulted in far-reaching practical implications. Jesus in the gospel, beautiful gospel, John 15 says, He is the vine, we are the branches. In other words, we are called to be connected to Jesus, and we are connected with Christ in very powerful ways. And when we are, like Paul, it has powerful results in our life. For Paul, one of the practical applications of this was death for Paul would not be a catastrophe. It didn't matter what he was doing. It didn't matter. He could sit in that jail cell. He'd be missing out on taking his ministry across the seas and being an international figure in taking out Christianity, which he was. He could sit in the jail cell. He didn't care. That was win. If they would take his life, he would win. If he would get out of jail and be able to continue his ministry, which he did, that would be a win. Practical ramifications. When we identify with Christ, our identification with Christ, when we realize that in our own life, it has far-reaching practical implications for us also. In our baptism, we have been sealed and marked with the Holy Spirit. And as we live into that baptism, there are far-reaching practical implications. We are freed up, like Paul, to do so many things. Why? Because whatever happens, whatever season of life we find ourselves in, whatever is going on, we win. It's always a win-win. To live is Christ, and to die is gain. And our identification with Christ then leads to commitment to Christ. You really can't be that committed to Christ if you first of all don't identify with Christ. And how committed was Paul? Well, let me again read some of the description of Paul's life and ministry from 2 Corinthians chapter 11. This is Paul's resume. He says, I'm an apostle because of this. And it's not because he's got some great theological degrees. He had them. It's not because that he had taken the gospel around the whole world. He did. But here is his resume, and it's all about his commitment and his suffering. And he only gets there because he identifies with Christ. He says this as he compares himself to other Christian evangelists who maybe are kind of boasting. He says, I've worked much harder. I've been in prison more frequently. I've been flogged more severely. I've been exposed to death again and again. 5 times I received from the Jews the 40 lashes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was pelted with stones. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I spent a night and a day in the open sea. I have been constantly on the move. I have been in danger from rivers, in danger from bandits, in danger from my fellow Jews, in danger from Gentiles, in danger in the city, in danger in the country, in danger at sea, and in danger from false believers. I have labored and toiled, and have often gone without sleep. I have known hunger and thirst, and have often gone without food. I have been cold and naked. That's Paul's commitment. His identification with Christ leads to this commitment to Christ. To live is Christ, to die is gain. Boy, beautiful words, and if all of us could take them home in our heart today, we would be better people for it. To live is Christ, to die is gain. Paul knew the importance of his heavenly passport. And yes, a passport's important to get in and out of Cuba, to get in and out of Canada, and as Shelby knows, to get in and out of Holland. You need a passport to get around on this planet. Paul knew he had a bigger passport to get into the heavenly places, and he was completely identified with Jesus Christ. To live is Christ, to die is gain. He knew he couldn't lose. and people of God. In our baptism, when we are able to identify with Christ, guess what? We can't lose either. To live is Christ, to die is gain. Whatever season of life we are in, we can move forward with the confidence that we are marked by the Spirit, we are guarded by Christ, and the power of God goes with us. Amen.
Amen.
Amen.